Huddle with paperplusoffice.co.nz, your local office supplies specialist, now open for business.
Joining us now on this evening's Huddle, Josie Pagani and Cameron Slater. A very good evening to you both.
Hello.
Good evening, Susan.
Now, an interesting email in here on this policy announced by David Sherry yesterday about trying to stop foreigners buying our property. It's from Ty. First it was the man ban, now it's the Mandarin ban. If Labour doesn't like something, they simply ban it. Race-based politics is appalling. I hope it will backfire for Labour. It's certainly changed my perception of the party, Josie. I suspect this could be part of the problem because it may not resonate well. This guy sounds like he's voted for Labour before with actual many Labour voters.
Well, it's not a Mandarin ban, though. It's a spec ban. It's a speculator ban, And so if you're saying that...
Well, you're not banning New Zealand speculators.
No, but you're banning overseas speculators who don't want to come and live here. They simply want to play monopoly with our houses. So you're saying you're not welcome if you're going to do that. But if you're going to come here and live here, that's absolutely fine. If you're going to come here and build houses or invest in our companies or forestry or research, then come on in. So if you're going to say that's racist, that's like saying a parent who smacks a kid on the bum is the same as a child abuser. It's just daft to say that's racist.
It's xenophobic, and there's a difference. Racism is targeting a particular race. This is just targeting all foreigners except Aussies. And it's an ill-considered, ill-thought-out, shameless dog whistle for the Labour Party. I'm told this was dreamed up on Thursday. It was an attempt to get a rolling narrative going about David Shearer.
I don't think that's right, Cameron. I don't think it was dreamed up on Thursday.
Yeah, who would be telling you that? Come on.
No, because I was involved. I know that it's been on the cards for a while. So let me just clarify that one.
If it's been on the cards for a while, you surely, if you're going to release a major policy, you would have basic things covered off, like exactly how many people is this affecting? Exactly what are the results? We heard this morning on Mike Hosking's show, we heard David Shearer saying that this won't affect New Zealanders. Well, if it's got no effect for New Zealanders, why would you do the policy anyway?
Well, but he's saying that it's not going to negatively affect New Zealanders.
It won't positively affect them either, so what's the point of doing that?
Because at the moment what you've got is you've got people who can come in, speculators who can come in and basically ratchet up the price of houses. So what they're saying, what Labor's saying, is that we'll give people who have who are wage earners who can go in and bid on a mortgage because they pay tax on their wages, for goodness sake, whereas the speculators don't pay tax on the profit of the money they make from property. So look, the other thing I think is really important to get across is that this is you're right. This isn't going to solve the problem of the housing bubble. But first of all, Cam, you've got to accept there is a problem, and I don't think you accept there is a problem.
There is not a problem. There is no evidence of this. Tony Alexander from the BNZ, he piped up and said we need to stop foreigners speculating. He then went and did some research, and he found out, gee, there's actually not a lot of them that are doing this.
If you don't accept there's a housing bubble, then obviously you're not going to try and fix it,
But this won't stop a housing bubble. The market will stop a housing bubble.
Isn't the underlying problem here, and I think we can probably agree on this, a supply and demand issue? There was not enough stuff built for a lot of years, certainly in Auckland. Christchurch is its own unique situation there. Let's leave it out of this current equation. In Auckland, not enough built over the GFC, and it's a matter of playing catch-up, and once that happens, the double-digit growth will stop, Cam.
But what's interesting about what you said, though, Susan, just to interrupt there, because yes, it's
a
supply problem, but it's also a demand problem. So it's a whole suite of tools that's going to make a difference, not just this one.
It won't make any difference, Josie.
What this does is simply remove some of the demand, a small amount of the demand. You're right, Cam, but some of the demand. So if you're telling me that the basic economics of supply and demand don't work anymore,
stop for a second and take a breath, I'll be able to explain.
All right, Cameron, off you go.
This has never worked anywhere in the world, ever. Neither has capital gains tax. David Shearer went at pains to point out Australia as an example. It hasn't stopped property prices rising in Australia. Neither has their ban on foreign investors. They simply create trusts, properties, property companies, holding companies, all of those sorts of things, which, of course, under law are natural persons. and can own property. It hasn't worked anywhere in the world.
Cam,
it won't work here.
I have to butt in here because when you say it hasn't worked, that means you're taking it completely in isolation, out of the context of other things. So if you look at the US has a tax. If the more you pay for a house, the more you get off your tax. So in other words, they've got an incentive for you to pay more on your house. So if you've got that and let me finish. If you've got that and a capital gains tax, one cancels out the other. So of course it doesn't work. Of course it didn't stop a house.
But Australia, Josie, you're trying to buy a house in Sydney recently. It makes Auckland look pretty cheap.
But you've got to look at the whole
Josie,
suite of things.
let me get a question in here. How good a look is it for Labor that this is a Greens policy? Now the Greens can go, well, that's lovely. They've just cut and pasted our policy. It's our policy.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make it. If it's a good policy, it's a good policy. I mean, it doesn't matter if it started
with Winston Peters or the Greens.
Or with Winston or with Labor. The point is, if there's a Labor-led government, Labor will be the lead party in that government, and if they're backing a suite of policies that says we're going to do something about an asset bubble, so your average family can buy your average house. If you don't think that's a problem, that's fine. Vote for Cam's lot.
All right, we'll take a quick break there. Josie Pagani, Cameron Slater. It is 14 to 6. Back in a moment. NewstalkZB, it's 12 to 6 with Josie Pagani and Cameron Slater, and. I've got to admit, Josie, I find this sort of quite amusing that investigative journalists are described as subversive in this Defence Force order. It's absurd.
If only, yeah. I mean, putting Osama bin Laden and Andrea Vance in the same category is a sort of biggest belief. It was interesting listening to your interview with the Minister, Jonathan Coleman. He was very careful to put a bit of distance between himself and Defence, wasn't he?
He was.
He kept saying, I understand, I'm led to believe, I've been informed, and then he says, interestingly, he said this is not baseless.
Yes, and I picked him up on that. Well, I picked him up on that, and he said, he did answer it, but he said, look, basically, Nikki Hargrave, if you've got something, put up or shut up, Cameron.
Well, that's a fair point, and this is a proven conspiracy theorist, a guy who writes books based off stolen or hacked emails, makes money off that. Now he's crying about privacy for journalists. In some cases, some of these journalists are actually the enemy of the Defence Forces and soldiers that are actually in the field out there trying to do a job. But the bizarre thing here is that you had Phil Goff, you had John Stevenson, you had Nikki Hagar, and most bizarrely of all, you had Bruce Ferguson, all saying this is dreadful, this is terrible. And what do we find out? This was done in 2003 when Bruce Ferguson was the head of the Defence Force, orders he signed off on, and Labor was the government that changed the law and made all of these regulations okay as a sop to the alliance back then, and were again changed in 2005. And they're trying to sheet all the blame home on this to John Key when it's actually Helen Clark, Mark Burton, Phil Goff, and all of the others that were associated back then. Cam,
take the politics out of it for a minute. I mean, I don't really care who said what, when, to whom, when. The point is, if your defence service is sitting there thinking that the embarrassing the government is somehow subversive by its nature, aren't you worried by that? I mean, that means if it's a left-wing government, you're first up in front of the firing line, Cam. I mean, the idea that it isn't the job of journalists to hold governments accountable to potentially embarrass governments if they're doing things.
Of course it is.
That's just, actually, that goes to the heart of our democracy. So you can play politics with it, but don't you care about that, Cam? Do you care about that?
You've asked me a question. Let me answer it. You've suggested that I take the word of Nikki Hagar as gospel. The Defence Force has come out and said this did not happen. The order, yes, that did happen. Bruce Ferguson was the guy who signed off on it. It's a little bit rich for him to be sitting there saying this is terrible when he was the boss of the Defence Department.
No, never any of them. In the wording in the Defence Manual, which says that journalists are subversive, they undermine the morale, the loyalty and the reliability, whatever that is.
Honestly, some of them do.
So you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I've been in the army.
All right.
I know what it's like when you've got a bunch of anti-war journalists who are doing everything that they can in their resources to upset you, to make sure that the enemy knows what's going on where you are, and you are at risk. And
time.
The joke of this is these same journalists are running around in theatre, and they're the first ones to call for help when things go wrong and their life is at risk.
Got to go. Cameron Slater, Josie Pagani, thank you both for your time this evening. It is 5:55.